This is an explanation about how you might go about completing your computer components task. This was done as a PowerPoint and presented in class, but of course at the moment I'm asking you to take your slides and then create an animation or a video with them. So this student started off with an opening slide and had the name of the task, and they actually put their purpose for their computer here. But the next slide specifically explained what sort of computer they were going to create. As you can see, this computer had a specialist task. It was to work on photographs and therefore had some specific needs for that. You had to choose a computer, so whether you chose a gaming or home and office or whatever it was, you need to be able to do that. The next slide is part of the task that you have to complete, which is actually explaining how the parts fit into the IPOS designation. So you have to include somewhere in your assessment task how the parts fit into the four main types of computer tasks. So here he listed the keyboard, mouse, tablet and camera as all input, the processing parts that they were going to buy, the outputting parts and the storage components. So that was a nice simple way of putting that together. Another thing you have to do is explain how data flows through the computer. Now this again is a very brief, but it's an accurate description of how data flows. So it begins off with data going into the computer, and the sort of data in this computer were photos and instructions about manipulating the images, the processing where the software, the programs took that data and created something else, and then the information that came out, which were edited photos that were going to be viewed on a screen. So simple, but fulfills the part of the assessment where you explain how data becomes information. The next few slides show you the sorts of parts that were bought. So you have the type of part, a keyboard, there was a little image, there was the model number and the price, and also the reason why they bought that particular part. So the keyboard, as you can see there, they wanted to give the computer instructions, what it wanted to do, and to use the software. So the keyboard was bought because it was only basic, and so they chose a cheap one. A mouse, again, just needed one that was basic, so they explained why they bought that. They also put in that another input device, a camera, for giving me most of the data input, but they already had one of those, and so they didn't need to buy another one. The second input device slide, they also were going to have a tablet. Now this was a specialist piece of equipment that was going to be useful for editing photos and doing special effects on their photos. This is not something you would necessarily buy, but it is something they needed for their computer. Then they went through the output devices and again told me what they were buying, the model, the price, and then their explanation or their justification. The monitor and screen, I needed to see my photos, I needed to use it for, and use the photo software, etc., etc. You can read through that yourself. They decided and made a note that they didn't include a printer because they couldn't fit it into their budget, but they might buy one in the future. So you can do that with your assignment. You don't have to, they can still see their photos, they can still, they bought speakers and just some basic ones because they thought they might need them, but future output devices would be considered. The processing were all also put in, so the CPU, the motherboard, the memory, the costs, and the justification of why they bought those particular ones. You see there they explain the motherboard connects all the components. The more you spend, the more features you get, but because they're not doing gaming, for instance, they don't need a particularly fast computer, a mid-range motherboard contained everything they needed. The memory, photographs do take up quite a bit of memory, but again, they were thinking about the budget, so they bought the memory that the best memory they could afford for the budget that they had. Some more processing, a video card, a case and a power supply. Don't forget you need to have a power supply to make things work. A case, you have to store all the components, but it doesn't have to be a fancy one. And then the last thing's the optical drive, the operating system, and they thought that they probably would get Wi-Fi, but their motherboard actually had an Ethernet connection so that they could use the inbuilt one rather than getting specifically something for wireless. And then their storage. They needed to store software and images, so they had a reasonably good storage device. Now if we go back here, I wanted to just make sure that you understand you need to have a CPU, you need to have a motherboard. You don't need to have a whole lot of extra things. You can use what sometimes they've inbuilt, so use your PC part picker, have a look at all the components. You don't need to, I've had boys in some classes buy something which had specifications and added to it, for instance, extra memory. You don't need to do that. Make sure of the range of all the different parts that you've got. Okay, he then included a their budget. Now you don't have to include this in your PowerPoint. You've got a table that I've put on today's lesson plan that you can fill in and add separately, or you can add it to your final slides. And then the bibliography was for all of the places where they got information. So they actually looked up a couple of articles about what sort of things they would need to build a PC for photographers. They looked up some consumer rights reports to see what sort of suggestions they had. They used PC Part Picker, and then they also looked up a Wacom. So this one here covered off on everything. It wasn't fancy, but it covered off on everything quite adequately, explaining all the things that they needed to have, explaining data flow, and explaining the IPOS. So you would get, or this person got a B for this assignment. So good luck, boys, and I look forward to seeing your work.